Welcome to The Explainer. I am so glad you're here with us today because we are going to unpack something absolutely fascinating: the real-world, gritty reality of cultural integration. We hear buzzwords like assimilation and inclusion thrown around in the news literally all the time. But what actually happens on the ground when hundreds of thousands of people need to integrate into a completely new society? Well, today we're zooming in on the actual front lines of this cultural shift to look at the data and the raw lived experiences of the people right in the middle of it.
Right, so let's dive in. First things first, we have to credit our guide for this journey. Everything we're exploring today comes directly from two brilliant academic papers authored by researcher Dr. Julio Cesar Tovar Galvez. He did this incredible, in-depth case study on the massive integration courses run by the German government. And he looked at it from two completely different angles: the teacher's perspective in his 2021 paper and the student's perspective in his 2022 paper. We've got the full APA 7 citations for both of these up right now, and we'll bring them back up at the end of the explainer too.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to define the acculturation challenge, explore the cultural bridge approach, check out the view from the teacher, then the view from the students, look at why it's a one-way street, and finally wrap up with the future of cultural inclusion.
Part 1, defining the acculturation challenge, a society in transition. We really need to ground ourselves in the sheer scale of this before we get into the weeds.
Just look at this number: 890,000, when 890,000 asylum seekers arrived in Germany in 2015 alone. I mean, wow, right? The government's integration courses suddenly became the absolute front line for cultural convergence. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of adults from vastly different backgrounds sitting in classrooms together. And they aren't just there to learn German. They're trying to absorb local values, history, the unspoken social norms, the whole shebang. And that brings us to the core concept for today: acculturation. Basically, it's the cultural changes, adaptations, or accommodations that people experience when immigrants converge toward a new cultural context. The million-dollar question we're looking at is this: is this acculturation process happening in these classrooms a genuinely inclusive exchange, or is it just a forced exclusionary mandate?
The older, famous integration theories we've all grown up with, they actually fail pretty hard at fostering mutual empathy. Take the melting pot idea. It basically induces minorities to just melt into the local culture, which, understandably, it leads to a lot of resistance. Then you have the salad bowl approach. It aims for a mix, but it usually ends up creating this standard, average culture that still secretly forces everyone to assimilate to a manufactured norm. Neither of these really respects independent, coexisting cultures.
Moving on to part 2, the cultural bridge approach, a new framework. If the pot and the bowl are broken metaphors, what's the alternative? Dr. Tovar Galvez proposes something he calls the cultural bridge. Instead of melting everything together, picture a bridge connecting two totally solid, independent landmasses. This bridge rests on two powerful pillars. Pillar 1 is cultural independence, which means actively validating diverse cultures as independent, standalone content. Pillar 2 is cultural similarity, which is all about finding those common human values and practices to help cross those borders. It's a total game changer because communities can participate in new cultures while completely preserving their own. Part 3, view from the teacher, navigating the system. Theory is great, but let's test this bridge in reality, starting from the teacher's side of the desk. Through his interviews, Dr. Tovar Galvez found that even when a teacher desperately wants to build that cultural bridge, their hands are kind of tied. They are boxed in by systemic constraints. We're talking extremely rigid official curricula, a massive reliance on mandated textbooks, the constant stress of standardized tests, and super short timeframes to cover an absolute mountain of material. It creates this huge conflict. Teachers actively try to guarantee cultural independence, but the curriculum throws up these insurmountable barriers. And educators' genuine willingness to foster inclusion gets completely hijacked by the need to just rush through the mandatory material so students can pass their tests. There are just so few opportunities for real, genuine interaction. Part 4, view from the students, beyond grammar. Let's physically cross the classroom now and look through the eyes of the immigrants. Here is a direct testimony that perfectly captures that frustration. One student said 2 of these teachers were not really caring, just going to the checkbox, the list, and checking the box, "I have seen the grammar." That really hits home, doesn't it? When the teacher is overwhelmed by constraints, the bridge just feels totally broken to the student. It feels like a cold administrative checklist instead of actual human integration. But
Flip that around, and you see how a simple change in strategy works absolute wonders. Another student noted, when we were discussing the political system, they asked us what the organization was like in our country, if it was a democracy or not. See what happened there? By just pausing to ask about the student's home country, the teacher is actively building that cultural bridge. They're using that cultural similarity pillar we talked about earlier to spark mutual identification. So for students, this whole thing is essentially an obstacle course. First, they have to dominate the basic mechanics of a brand new language. Then, they have to overcome that rigid, checkbox-style teaching. And finally, if everything aligns, they reach that mutual cultural identification, where they evolve from just memorizing grammar rules to actually feeling like they're participating. Which brings us to part 5, a one-way street, the synthesis. What happens when we put these two views together? When you look at the limitations side by side, it's pretty concerning. Teachers are fighting rigid curriculum demands, short timeframes, and test pressures. Meanwhile, students are battling language barriers, sometimes dismissive teachers, and a huge lack of actual contact with everyday Germans. The ultimate takeaway? Both sides are facing massive hurdles, but the system's design is literally isolating them from one another. This is really the climax of Dr. Tovar Galavez's findings. A bridge needs traffic going in both directions, right? But currently, the integration course acts as a one-way street. Immigrants are pouring in immense effort, transiting the bridge to learn the German language and culture. But the local German community, and the curriculum itself, is not crossing back to learn about them. It severely narrows down the potential for true cultural inclusion.
Finally, part 6, Future of Cultural Inclusion, Next Steps. We definitely don't want to just leave you with the problems. Let's talk solutions.
To actually fix this bridge, policymakers need to take some serious notes. We need flexible curricula so teachers have the freedom to actually explore cultural connections. We have to encourage reciprocal cultural relationships, meaning the host country has to be just as curious and welcoming. Ultimately, we should be aiming for justice-based acculturation, where power is balanced and mutual respect is just the baseline standard.
As we wrap up this explainer, we absolutely have to say a massive thank you to Dr. Julio Cesar Tovar Galvez again for his rigorous fieldwork. We've got the APA 7 citations up for both of his papers right here. His dual perspective on the acculturation process reminds us that integration isn't just some dry policy on a piece of paper. It's a deeply human, interactive process. So I want to leave you with this one final provocative thought. Think about your own society, your own neighborhood, your own workplace. Is the burden of integration truly shared? Who is actually doing the heavy lifting? And who is doing the crossing on your community's cultural bridge?